there can be only one reality, and the reality has been so actively condemned that anyone who hasn't shed themselves of this reality must automatically be shot down by those trying to protect the lies.
You know, if I ask you to put your finger on the one most telling piece of evidence that you use to say that the whole Apollo 11 thing was nonsense, what do you point to?
Radiation in space, and that came later because the information has been so severely bottled up that it took me about 10 years to get the final proof.
I'm going to have to ask you for like a grade 3 explanation of this. I thought it was a case built on photos and things like that.
It was in the beginning. Have you read my book?
I haven't seen it, no.
Well, how can you possibly hope to do a book on this when I have the seminal book on this whole conspiracy scheme?
See, I've seen a lot of websites that actually make the same case that you do, you know? So
no, I'm sorry you don't. What you see is a lot of plagiarism going on, and Bill Casing was the first. I did not plagiarize him. He did not obviously plagiarize me.
Rene, I'm asking you to make your case. I'm not asking you to defend your book. I'm just asking you to make your case why it is that people should not believe it.
Have you ever heard the name John H. Malden?
New to me.
Well, he was an ex-astrophysicist for NASA. He wrote a book called Prospects for Interstellar Travel. On page 225 of his book, we find these statements. Hang on while I get to them. By comparison, solar flares can deliver GeV protons in the same energy range as most cosmic particles, but at much higher intensities. Increase of energy accounts for most of the increased radiation danger because of GeV protons or their products will penetrate several meters of material. Malden goes on to say that cosmic particles are dangerous, come from all sides, and require at least 2 meters of solid shielding around all living organisms. That's 2 meters of water. Now, he then states solar or star flares...
You've got to translate this for me, Rene. The language that you're reading doesn't mean anything to me.
Oh, by God, it should, sir. I mean, you've been employed by NASA all these years.
Oh, wait,
this is a direct quote from an astrophysicist.
You're confused, Mr. Rene. You're confused again.
It's actually Dick Gordon, the host of the program, asking you to make sense of this for me.
Okay, we have not too good a shielding.
No, you don't have too good an idea of what's going on in the world.
Sir, you're either a NASA apologist and totally ignorant, or you're a liar. I'm here to determine which.
It cannot be overlooked that Phil Plait was also a guest on this very program, and even hypes about his appearance on this radio show. Therefore, he is very aware of these passages from Malden's book that Rene quoted, and knows very well that meters of shielding is required. Yet, the words John Malden simply don't exist in Plait's vocabulary, and to this day, he continues to allege that one doesn't need meters of shielding to survive the cislunar radiation. In 2005, Phil Plait had this to say about the radio show that he and Rene appeared on.
I dealt with Rene many years ago on an NPR broadcast where they had called me and said, "We want to do a Moonhoax show," and I said, "That's great." And they said, "We want to have one of the big Moonhoax guys on," and I said, "Well, here are the 4 big guys, but of the 4 of them, the one you want the least is Ralph Rene." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because he's a grumpy bastard." And some people would say, "Oh, that's a personal attack." And it's like, I strongly suspect that he would be the first person to call himself a grumpy bastard, because he is. He's a curmudgeon. And but they wound up getting him, and it was kind of funny because he's there, he's growling and steaming and fuming and stamping his feet and saying nothing. He says nothing.
But despite all his character attacks and verbal masturbation, in actuality, Plait was in fact the one who said nothing. While Ralph Rene laid into Jim Oberg about how James Van Allen's Geiger counters got jammed by an enormously high level of radiation, Phil Plait kept his mouth shut until finally the host rudely cut Rene off just before he could provide Van Allen's numbers for particle counts per second. As I finalise this video that you are watching, NASA is preparing itself for their next shuttle ride into the South Atlantic Anomaly, STS-125. This altitude, of course, puts the shuttle well into the South Atlantic Anomaly. If the contradictory numbers that NASA gave for the Skylab and shuttle flights are any indication, we should see some tiny milliram numbers on paper when we should expect to see more than a lifetime dose of radiation. Depending, of course, on which story you'd rather believe. That of the late Dr. Badwa, who stated that one can heal over 70 minutes after exposure to the SAA, or Mr. Winderley, who states that we do not have this healing ability, and then tries to pin the dead guy's statement on those who quoted him. We all know that a proven liar can never be trusted, and yet, sometimes a proven liar manages to slip up and lets out the truth.
There is a dip in the Van Allen belts over the South Atlantic. It's called the South Atlantic Anomaly. And the shuttle goes through this every 7 or so orbits. Hubble goes through it every 7 orbits. They have to shut it down, have to shut some of the instruments down because of the increased radiation.
He said that it was dangerous and you had to shut it down. Well, if it's that dangerous that an instrument can't take it, how can a man take it?
I suspect Phil Plait will soon backpedal after this film is released, assuming he doesn't simply choose to ignore me in fear that I might remind him of Operation Dirty Trick. If he does respond, you can bet the same old backpedal will be, "Jarrah misinterpreted my statements." Sorry Phil, but I can't be held responsible for what regretful words slip out of your mouth.